Yeah, so my name is Krishna. I'm a director with the risk consulting practice based out of Chennai. So welcome you to the track 3 session on continuous monitoring and real-time assurance. Pleasure to introduce my colleague Ashish Agarwal. He's a director from the risk consulting practice, has more than 16 years of experience, including 5 years in the industry. So he's been on both the sides of the table in a sense. A chartered accountant by professional qualification, but I think a technologist by passion. In the morning session, we spoke dwelled a lot of topics around continuous monitoring and real-time assurance. This is more to deep dive into those concepts and look at some examples and real-life use cases of how this can actually work, in your day-to-day situations as well. So without further ado, I'll take an opportunity to invite Ashish to take over the session as well. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks Katie for the introduction. Hi everyone and welcome to this post-lunch session. So for the next 70 minutes I'll try that the discussion that we do is not too tasking, otherwise I'll see a lot of heads dozing off here. But yes, I think the subject in itself is so exciting that I think I expect a lot of you to be getting engaged as we proceed with the discussion today. So we are talking about continuous monitoring and real-time assurance. Okay, and now before we get into discussing this, we need to understand exactly what do we mean by continuous monitoring, CM for short. Okay, I think by the very definition of it, it is continuous monitoring of transactions and events in a real-time manner or closer to real-time, and the objective is to detect so the objective is to detect and preempt any kind of a possible deviation that can happen from the expectations that we have from the business. Now what it will lead to? It will lead to driving fast decisions, and of course taking swifter actions, and at the same time ensuring that the decision makers are able to take these decisions in a more real-time sense than depending upon, say, a third-line function auditing, which is going to maybe give the results after some period of time. Now, how it can be achieved? Of course, it can be achieved by it can be achieved by analyzing your measurable data and control requirements around all your policies, standards, and procedures. Now we name it by multiple multiple terminologies like continuous controls monitoring, continuous auditing, real-time assurance, or continuous risk management, etc. But why do we do it is pretty much evident from based on how we can drive data-driven insights and how we can organize and become more structured in our risk assurance. So now before we get into the discussion of continuous controls monitoring or we talk about this subject, I think it is very important to discuss that who should be the owner of this or who should be driving this in the organization. Now we are into an IIA conference today, so by default the answer can be it should be the internal auditor who should be driving this. But then is it really the future? Is it really the future that the third line of defense should be or the internal audit function should be driving a CCM agenda? So before we get into this, let's first understand what is the role of the different three lines of defense today. So line one, typically, as we see, are the people who are the doers, who own and manage the business. Okay. Line two typically is into the monitoring task, where they're talking about, they're into reporting, they're into providing limited assurance based on control self-assessments. So when we say control self-assessment, typically, the activities around, IFC, ICOFAR, or for all the SEC registered companies, say SOX. So these are typically the functions that falls into line 2 as of date. Okay, and then of course the larger part of assurance to the audit committee and subsequently to the board comes from the third line. Okay, now this is what is the state as of today. Now, if we want to now transition to the era of continuous controls monitoring and real-time assurance, we will have to take few steps, okay, and how those steps will be taken. Now, I'll come back to the previous slide subsequently, because we only talked about the current state, but then to navigate to the future state, we need to kind of get something done. Now, what is this? As a part of the CCM agenda, we talked about in the first slide that we have to generate data-driven insights. Okay. Now, for having the data-driven insights, the first and foremost question to be asked is what? Okay, what exactly do we want to achieve? Okay, and the what answer can be answered by assessing, what are the controls in the organization that are automatable. Now, how are we going to define a control which is automatable? Let's say, it's a simple open question. So how will we define a control that the control is automatable from a testing perspective? What can be the prerequisites? Availability of data, of course, and very important point, the nature of activity should be repetitive. If suppose it is one time, then any kind of automation is not going to give you the desired outcome or results or the benefit of this. Of course, anything else? Sorry? Risk appetite. Okay. So if I am understanding you correct, you want to say whether I should be automating only those controls which are going beyond my organization's risk appetite. Right. That can also be a view depending upon the risk posture of the organization. But yes, that can also be a considerable, that can be also a consideration for adopting or going into a CCM. But typically, I think it is, the key aspects that we just talked about. You have to have a measurable data that we just talked about in the first slide. Okay, because if the data itself is not measurable, for example, in today's world with the advent of Gen AI and AI-based technology, image processing, etc., we tend to get into the domain of utilizing all these technologies for monitoring controls. And a simple example of that could be, let's say for my security controls, physical security controls, I would want to say set up some kind of a continuous controls monitoring function on the CCTV footages. Okay, or let's say I am into a real estate business or a mall business, and I want to monitor the footfall of people into my malls using CCTV footages. Now, for the second example, it is really key to the business. So spending the technological cost of doing this analysis for a mall business is very relevant. And this is where we go back to the risk appetite kind of the consideration, where for them the footfall is very, very key important parameter. Okay, so for them it is very important to spend into this kind of a technology to analyze CCTV footages to count the footfalls. But then for say security as an aspect, physical security as an aspect, and depending upon what exactly are we securing, let's say the IT assets of the company? Very, very critical. Are we securing, let's say, some organizations, plants and operation, or the premises? Important. Okay, but then the kind of the important consideration always that business has to take into consideration is what is going to be the cost of the same, right? So that with that important consideration, what needs to be assessed has to be driven by what are the controls that needs to be monitored. Do we have adequate amount of measurable data for the same? And what are the various kinds of technologies we should adopt? Okay, and to what extent should I expand the entire exercise of CCM? Okay, once that is done and we know what is the data that we are going to be analyzing, then comes the slightly more deeper and technical part of data transformation. Now, why data needs to be transformed? A simple example of this could be, let's say we in our business are using various, there are so many ERPs, SAP, Oracle, BAN, etc. Now there is the data from those typical systems will come in a certain format. Okay. And then data comes from other systems as well. Let's say there are some bespoke applications surrounding your business. There are some sensor-based information, typically a biometric system which is there in all organizations for capturing attendance. Now, if you want to talk about certain controls to be developed around the payroll exercise, so that becomes an important data source. So, but it's not necessary that from all these different systems, the data will come in a single format, or whether it will be a format which can be utilized for processing and writing the analytical scenarios of queries. So data transformation becomes critical with respect to how we can have a single, transformed, concise, and accurate version of data truth, so that whatever analysis that we perform on this is more accurate, more reliable, and more comprehensive. So I have been doing this particular exercise of providing various kind of risk analytics and CCA based solutions for the past 7 years now, and in any one of these implementations where I have supported my clients, we've seen that almost 30% of the initial time on the project actually goes in this particular exercise of identifying what needs to be developed and then transforming the relevant data for the same, so that it is now ready for any kind of a developer or technological person to code it, to write the required algorithms for the same, and then generate the required insights. So 30% is the amount of time that really goes into this. Okay, and that is the amount of that is the kind of importance that is attached to this particular step. And of course, it will involve steps like performing the required data quality aspects, ensuring that the data on which we're working is complete, is correct, accurate, and it's measurable. And once that is done, then of course we get into the exercise of automated testing. Now, when we talk about automated testing, the first thing that comes to our mind is writing algorithms, scenarios, scripts using various kinds of technologies. Okay, but then what to do with that? Now, once these exceptions are generated, once these deviations are generated, once these outliers are generated, okay, should we simply report it as internal audit professionals, or should we kind of go beyond to ensure that the entire loop of getting an exception generated to it finally getting rectified or resolved? This is where the role of the third line and second line kind of gets overlapped at times. Okay, because we as IIA professionals are responsible for reporting, okay, and ensuring that whatever has been reported or whatever has been recommended, it gets implemented. But then, do we see the end of implementation? Do we drive that implementation? I think not, because that's not our role. That is typically done by a line 2 or a line 1 function. So, but then, once the automated testing is done and the results are available, I think what becomes important is to create a framework. The framework in which the entire exercise of getting these outliers, communicating these outliers, ensuring an action on these outliers, and documenting the resultant root cause, the resultant corrective and preventive actions for the same. Unless this framework is put in place, the entire exercise basically becomes a tick in the box where rows and rows and crores of exceptions get generated. However, they never kind of meet any kind of larger objective of the organization, because and then if this framework is not put in place, such kind of an exercise can always kind of die its own death. And this is something that has been seen in a lot of organizations of late, where such kind of programs were taken, Okay, they were run for some time, and then just because if the framework that was put in place, or the effectiveness of the framework that was put in place was not robust enough to drive the required action or decision making in the process. So that's where, of course, continuous monitoring framework becomes important, and thereafter, once it has kind of matured, and once it has kind of stabilized, it's important that the risks that gets identified as a part of this process. What is the treatment done to the risk? How we are how do we mitigate those risks? How we redesign our controls or make our existing controls more robust so that of course, the future is improved. We talk about not the same kind of control deviations as we move into the future. So this can happen by, as to how this will happen. You have to ask the right questions as to why this happened. The typical 5 whys. Okay, as to why this happened. So you have to ask the better questions so that you are able to get the required answer as to how to mitigate in the future. Then what are the kind of data-driven insights you want on a continuous basis? Now this is where the preemptive part of such exercise comes into play. So while we are analyzing historical data and getting the desired result, okay, can we develop data-driven insights using predictive modeling solutions so that we are able to get these outliers or the hints about these outliers so well in advance, so that we can avoid them to get in getting matured. And then subsequently, the kind of risks that we are monitoring, are these the right kind of risks from a strategic perspective, or there are other kind of risks that we should include into the program? Now typically what happens, a CCM exercise predominantly starts with the all kinds of financial and operational risks, and many a times the risks at a strategic level are kind of relegated at the back burner, because typically the correlation between performing or doing a CCM exercise for strategic risks is seen with respect to the data available for the same is very difficult to establish at times. But then it is important that we kind of start with the say a top-down approach of first identifying the strategic risks for the business, and then how those strategic risks drop downs or comes down to the larger operational or these step down operational and financial risks. And then that can be the approach which can be used for the purpose of designing what exactly are the risks that should be monitored on a CCM program. So I take a pause over here to see if there are any questions, reflections, or any comments on what we discussed. Yes, please.
So, thanks for the information. Just wanted to know, where do you actually start with practically when you are trying to look for this information? Like, which department do you go to? Is it like the finance that you start with, or do you start with IT, or do you start with the ERP function? Where do you actually knock the door first?
Well, as I just said, I'll typically knock the door of my enterprise's top 10 risks. I'll not go process-wise. Okay, typically, because if you are going process-wise, then you are not actually capturing the entire gamut. You have defined, say, your top risks. Okay, now these top risks can be from your procurement function, they can be from your capex function, they can be typically from your say ESG related risks, which are very common in organizations and very much prevalent. So I would typically start from there, and then from that strategic risk, I would see what are the contributing controls, avenues, areas, processes, sub processes which are contributing to that particular risk. And that should be typically the design of the program with respect to what you want to focus on. Because if you want to go process-wise, the exercise itself is going to take some time, because you cannot, go with the big bang approach. Let's say you want to start a CCM exercise for, say, all the 10 processes that you have in your risk and controls matrix. Okay, Well, practically it will not be possible because then you are trying to engage the entire business into this exercise. Okay, so I think if I were if I was the head of the organization from an internal perspective or in charge of the CCM agenda, I would start from the top 10 risks of the organization.
Just a follow-through question.
Yes.
Once you identify the, I get it, you go from the ERM and you see what's the risks that is there. But once you get the risks, so whom do you ask? Do you ask like a database? Let's say there is nobody in the organization who manages the data as such.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start with
That in itself is an exercise actually. Okay, and as we move forward, I will exactly show what could be the roadmap of transitioning into this future exercise of CCM. So just give me a moment. I'll cover it as a part of this as to what should be the steps. Because yes, it's important how to identify, right? Any other questions? Any comments, reflections?
Just on the data quality part,
Yeah.
like 30% is spent on.
Mm-hmm.
That's true also. We have
Hmm.
seen in many occasions that any automation, the underlying factor there is the data quality.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the quality of data, it's the versions of the files which we get through that, and how compatible it is with the tools which we implement.
Yeah.
So how do you get through that? Because it has various parameters and dynamics when it comes to data quality.
Let's discuss this right now. Thank you for leading me to my next slide. Okay, and I'll be just skipping this particular part because we already discussed this into these particular questions, but I will come to this. So typically, now from a very step by step exercise, once you have decided what you want to do, okay, this is what you need to do from a step by step approach. How to get the required quality of data. Now, to get the required quality of data, you have to avoid and eliminate any kind of human intervention. Till the time we have human intervention, there will be issues around data quality, data integrity, data completeness. And how we can do that? We can do that by setting up a technological landscape or architecture which is sourcing the information right from the source. So the source can be your ERP system, as we talked about. The source can be any kind of a bespoke application that you're using. The source can be maybe some source level generated spreadsheets. Okay, the problem is not with the spreadsheet. The problem is that the spreadsheets change hands, and there is absolutely correctly said version control mismatch. So if we are able to generate this, capture the data information that we want to analyze right from the source, the almost 90% of the issue around quality, completeness, and accuracy takes care of itself. Then whatever 10% remains is basically a problem with the source.
Yeah,
it's not a problem.
That's
Yeah.
the major problem in cases where there are no manual intervention.
Hmm.
Still, the data quality from the source itself is wrong, format or whatever it is.
So format is something which is really handleable with technology that we have in place today. So format is never a concern. The concern is with respect to the discipline of having the right data in the ERP. Okay, and I would say the first inputs that any kind of a CCM or analytics exercise has given to the business has been with respect to the quality. And I'll take a classic case of an example that we just had a few months back. We were working with a large FMCG company, and the agenda was basically monitoring of the key risk indicators which were getting reported to the board, and which were getting utilized for their. It was a promoter driven company, so they wanted to kind of and it was rare for a promoter driven company to kind of talk about risk with that much amount of passion, but then they were really keen about it. And they had a kind of a reporting mechanism in place which was which was in place for some time, but they said that there is something wrong, because when I want to tie back these numbers that gets reported to me with what is actually happening on the ground, I don't get the required comfort. So they asked us, okay, you please automate this entire process. There are so many manual interventions over here. And the first input after the automation was done that the business got was that what is coming from the ERP or directly coming through what we implemented was basically some visualizations that we did for them in Power BI. So is that these headers that I'm getting as a part of this report, they never came to me. That was the first reaction from the promoter. Now, why did this happen? Because for the purpose of reporting, there was somebody who was actually pre-processing that information and creating a very good rosy picture for the management, right? And the problem was at the source, because somebody was actually tinkering with the information at the source itself. Now, what the business then realized that I want my information in these 10 headers, but the information in the source, which is my ERP, is not contained in these 10 headers. It is contained in 50 different headers, which are overlapping each other. Okay, but this what I call garbage in my data was never visible to me, because it was always window dressed and presented to me in a very, very rosy format. Okay, so that's the first input, which I would say that gets generated out of a CCM exercise as to what is the quality of my source itself. And from there, because many a time a lot of my client has said, oh my God, my ERP is is of no use. It is not containing any kind of good information. The quality of data is rubbish, etc. Okay, but that's what we say, that is the reason why you should have this, because you currently don't even know that what is the level of garbage in your data. And from there, of course, a top-driven transformation starts, where you can actually start plugging the holes. You can drive a better discipline so that the information that you have at source is more accurate. But then it has to be driven. It cannot be overnight. It has to be continuously reported, and continuously challenged, because a wrong reporting will basically go back to the user as to what is happening, and he has to respond that, yeah, it was my mistake that I put the information incorrectly in the system. If that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah,
that's the key part, and we also face the same situation.
Yes. So that's what quality of data which is in the source, or poor quality of data in the source, should never be a challenge or a hindrance in taking up a CCM exercise, because that is actually going to be an exercise in improving the quality of the data, right? So and for doing this, as I said, we just were talking about putting in place some kind of an architecture. So when we talk about an architecture is basically how I can, from the point of source to the point of an exception or an output, how I can avoid any kind of manual intervention. I have just presented this as an example. Okay, so an architecture of it's a very simplistic architecture. Of course, the real world examples of this would be much more complex depending upon the size and the nature of your business. But typically data coming from source, okay, getting stored in a particular repository. Now, what you see on the screen over here as these are typically 3 types of cloud spaces that we normally use: Azure, Amazon, Google, etc. So storing this information either on a cloud or on-premise. Then, of course, creating all your required analytics on the same, and then creating concise as well as individual transaction level monitoring reports or systems, where you can handle each exception transaction or event and provide a larger consolidated reporting as well. So that should be, these should be the key considerations that you should take into account when you are designing an architecture for a CCM module. Okay. Now, once you have the architecture, the technology in place, the next step would be first of all asking why we entered into this particular exercise. So what were the type of controls that we wanted to monitor? And I'll take a simple example of duplicate payment. Okay, how can we avoid duplicate payment? Now, this is a kind of a scenario which is sector agnostic. Every business will have vendors, and with every vendor there will be a risk of duplicity. Duplicity can be at a master level, duplicity can be at a transaction level. Okay, so once we have identified, so this is, let's say one of the controls that we want to get our assurance on, that how can we monitor it on a continuous basis. So the what get answered. Now after this, the next question is, okay, the data will come from where? Okay, so this is another, will it come only from my ERP, or let's say I have got say a supplier relationship management system, or I have got a separate accounts payable system, which is because today AP automation is being taken as an exercise in a lot of large organization. So over there, this information is not just contained in your ERP as a posted invoice. It is also contained, as a scanned document into either a DMS, data document management system, or it can be as a part of a third-party application which the business might be using for processing invoices. So this is from where we'll get answered. So do I want to create a detective mechanism where I identify a duplicate invoice after it has been already posted into my system, or do I create a preventive kind of mechanism where, let's say, right at the source of scanning the invoice, okay, I have created a kind of a control or a test that it can automatically tell me or notify me that this invoice that is getting scanned or posted in the business is actually a duplicate and you should avoid it. So these are the considerations that are again, taken into account when deciding the depth of the CCM exercise, and at the same time, once you have decided the depth, from where to get the data or information for the same to reach to that level of depth. Thereafter, of course, how much? Okay, now I can get an invoice, a duplicate invoice for an invoice that was posted 3 years back, or I can get a duplicate invoice for an invoice that was posted say 1 month back. Okay, so this is where the question of how much is important. And this is where the risk appetite of the business comes into play. That okay, fine, I need to manage the cost of handling historical data versus the kind of result I want to get. If there is something which is, let's say, 3 year past, I can't do much about it. So let's say I want to only monitor for the last 3 years. Or somebody can be saying that okay, what has happened in the past is done. I want to start only from the current financial year. So this is basically the consideration which is important as to how much you want to analyze, how historically back in time you want to go with respect to this particular exercise. Then of course the question comes as to how often. Okay, now you want to do it on a daily basis. You want to do it on an hourly basis. You want to do it on a weekly basis. It will again depend upon how your overall function is designed. So let's say for an organization where payments are processed once a week, a weekly exercise is good enough. You can have this exercise say done at least a day or two in prior to the payment run. So you can get all the possible duplicates and avoid the payments for the same. If you are processing, if you have a host to host, I'm sure we all understand host to host payments here. So if you have a host to host implemented, then immediately after your invoice is posted and it becomes due, you can have a payment run for that. That is where you need to do it more frequently. Then another consideration could be what are the kind of payment terms, whether these are payment terms which are very, very small, let's say 10 days, 15 days, so you don't have much time after an invoice is posted, or they are, typically, large payment terms, you have good credit available from your vendors. So this can be very, consideration as to how often you can do this kind of an exercise. And then of course, the final question comes as to who. Okay, which is the question that we asked in the beginning itself, is whether it should be done by the IIA function or the third line of defense, or whether it should be done by the controlling function, or the AP function in itself, which is falling into the accounts in the first line, should be having controls, continuous monitoring avenues to control this. So this is, we will answer as to who subsequently as we move to our next level of discussion. Now, once we have talked about the extraction part, okay, once you've answered these 5 questions of what, from where, how much, how often, and who, there comes the exercise of warehousing. Okay, because typically someone can ask me that, let's say, I'm taking an example of SAP because that's an ERP used by a lot of our clients and organizations. So someone would say, why can't I simply run these analytics directly on SAP? Why can't I run these tests? I can design these tests as ABAP reports, and these reports can give me results on near real time. I don't need to thing is that if you want to, the simple analogy or simple argument against this is that you've designed your ERP system for documenting your transactions. None of the ERP systems, or for that matter, any kind of bespoke application is designed for running analytics on them. They are typically designed to help you do your financial transactions and documenting your transactions, right? So if you do analytics on them, you will simply significantly impact the performance of these systems. That is the reason it's important that the data that needs to be analyzed has to be brought out separate into some kind of a storage or staging area and warehoused before we run any kind of analytics. Because I'm sure whenever we drive this agenda as IA professionals with the business, typically any kind of an IT department would say that why do you want to invest on this separately? Why do you want to create a data redundancy? I have already got this data into my system. Why can't we simply create reports here? And this is where we have to come up with this particular argument that your ERP or the system that you are working back with is designed for a particular purpose. It's not designed for analytics, right? So warehousing of data becomes important over there. And then once this is done, it is about processing the information. Now, out of all the people that we have in this room, I'm sure we would have endeavored into analytics at some point of time in our careers till date. Okay, and the first thing that gets question for any kind of analytics is the first topic over here: how to handle false positives, what to do with false positives, right? Now I can see a lot of smiling faces over here because I can see a lot of us relate to this subject. So how to handle false positives and how to deal with them becomes an important consideration, and this consideration is where we have to use a lot of our experience, creativity, and current technologies around machine learning and AI are good solutions around this particular paradox of how to handle false positives, which has been there for ages. And this is where you can actually train some kind of a mathematical or an AI based model or an ML based model to help you squeeze the level of false positive. Whether it will completely eliminate them, I think the answer is no. Okay, it will not completely eliminate. No. If somebody tells you that I can create some kind of a model which will give you an absolute accurate results of analytics, I think that's an overstatement. Okay. But yes, the technologies that we have as of today have definitely created these opportunities where we can actually reduce the false positives. But then it will also depend upon what are the various considerations, how effectively we have considered into account all the possible factors that contribute to a particular false positive. And normally false positive eliminations is an exercise that is over a period of time. You design something, you review it, you optimize the script or the code, and thereby your analytics or the typical script that you have created start becoming sharper and sharper as you move ahead. Then of course the question is that we have talked about false positive, but then what are the available technologies? Which technology to adopt for the purpose of creating coding? Should it be writing simple SQL queries? Because when I say simple, this is a kind of a query language which is easy to adopt. Okay, there is a large volume of knowledge available for the same. Okay, but then is it effective enough? Is it capable of giving me the right kind of analytics in the right kind of time that I want it for? That is the question. So whether you want to use say SQL or a Python or an R will depend upon what is the kind of or the depth of the analytics that you want to perform. Thereafter, the question comes is that whether you want it to be absolutely hard coded. When you say hard coded, you have kind of fixed up the parameters, okay, and you don't want to change those parameters. So that's kind of hard coding in terms of the technology language. So you want to do that, or you want to keep it flexible, because both flexibility as well as hard coding have their own advantages and disadvantages. If you hard code, you get a consistent result. okay, and you tend to kind of get that result over a period of time. But if you, but then there are risk is a kind of subject that is evolving every day. So if you've hard coded, okay, the evolved risk might not be getting captured by your algorithm. But then should I keep it flexible then? Well, flexibility is good, but then you are not able to create a stable algo around what you want to achieve, right? So this is an important consideration again, but that has to be decided based on situations and what is the kind of analytics that we were running. Of course, then comes the question of speed, and for a risk scenario like duplicates, this again is kind of tying back to what is my payment cycle. Of course, then do we want it do we want it to be predefined now? Because, and it's an important point about whether it should be predefined or it should be self-service. First of all, what is predefined and what is self-service? A standard control in any ERP, which will avoid your duplicate invoice, is a predefined control. Okay, but then we all have observed that despite all kinds of predefined controls, exceptions do happen. Okay, except so this is where the consideration would be: should I completely depend upon the predefined controls, or should I keep my system or algo configurable so that I am able to keep on adding new parameters to the analysis so that it keeps on evolving over a period of time? So that's, and of course, do you want it on demand or you want it scheduled? Of course, I think for this, the answer would always be scheduled, because, you want it to be running continuously so that you can get the results on a continuous basis. So that's, with respect to processing and getting the required inputs and exceptions. Next comes, if these exceptions are getting, say, generated on a daily basis, who do we believe would be consuming these exceptions? Do we believe that, let's say, head of an accounts payable function or head of controlling function would be reviewing them on a daily basis? I don't think that is going to be the case, right? It is, our line managers or typically the people who are executing the transactions would be using these exceptions so that they can rectify them, right? So, but then whether this function is working effectively, whether the things that are getting notified are being actioned upon, if they are not getting actioned upon, where lies the responsibility? These are the typical parameters that will be analyzed, say, at a senior management or leadership level, which is where it is important to have some kind of visualization, which will talk about, which will concise the overall results of analytics in a fashion that that can tell some kind of story around what has been happening, that can give some kind of insights into what can be the root cause of what is happening. Then it can throw out some kind of dynamism. Now, that dynamism is basically with respect to when you create visualizations, these are not static PowerPoint presentation charts and graphs. These are dynamic in nature. You can do some level of drill down. So the drill down capabilities of various kinds of visualization application brings in the required brings in the required ability which can help the people who are using these concise reports to not just get a bird's eye view, but also kind of drill down to the subsequent details, and that can be an important, again, consideration in designing your visualization. Of course, then should it be designed for a particular user, or should it be designed for general reporting purposes? These are the aspects. So after so visualization is typically for the layer of reporting. Now again, this is where I've seen a lot of our clients saying that I want to do continuous controls monitoring, and please help me design dashboards. But then dashboards are not meant for continuous controls monitoring. Dashboard, who will monitor a dashboard? I cannot expect a line manager to be monitoring the dashboards. It's not, they're not meant for this. Dashboards are meant for senior management people, at least who are at least at an M1, M2, M3 levels. It is not so visualize dashboard. Somebody is telling me I want to do CCM and please make dashboards for me. Fine, I'll create dashboards, but then dashboard on top of what? Should I create a dashboard on your basic bare data? what will it help you in doing? It won't help you much, right? So you need to have some bit of, a ground level, I would say, basic level, or I would say, no, I think basic level is not the right term. I would say, granular level analytics, done for each individual control, which can then give you a concise, kind of a visualization which can be presented to a dashboard. So dashboard is never going to give us, monitoring around CCM. It is only going to give us reports, right? So important to have exceptions at transactions and events level, and then finally concise into reports.
Just a small question on that.
Sure, please. Yeah.
I mean, based on certain use cases, what we kind of understood is when it comes to implementation, we have the granular level controls, which as you just mentioned from a monitoring perspective, and then the data visualization. But how difficult is it to implement both together? Because we end up getting responses from the automation teams that I can implement these reports and everything, but data visualization is totally different platform. So we can't kind of bring this and merge it along with this. It has to be phase 2 and it gets bygone by the time.
Well, it's actually, in our experience, it's actually the opposite. Because I have seen a lot of IIA professionals creating beautiful dashboards, but when it comes to doing the real analytics and creating the algos, that is where typically the challenge is faced, right? Because I know so many IIA professionals, or for that matter, line 2 professionals, who have been able to easily train themselves on creating these visualizations.
Yeah,
Okay.
data visualization as a standalone is possible, but we do both together.
Yes,
Right?
they have to go hand in hand. They will always have to go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. Because if you are only doing transactional level analysis and only transactional level exception monitoring without a governance framework and without a reporting framework, then the efficacy of that particular exercise can never be monitored. So there has to be a reporting layer, there has to be a governance mechanism, some kind of framework, and that framework can be driven through these kind of reports and dashboards. What I'm trying to say is that contrary to popular advertising, a lot of visualization application pose themselves as analytics platform. Okay. Well, I take a bit of an I have a reservation with that analogy, because these platforms, while of course somebody from these who's managing the platform might kind of kill me today, but then they're not designed for analytics. They're designed for visualization purposes. They have basic analytics capabilities, but then analytics is a very larger and deeper subject. And I'll not name any one of these applications, but they're not designed for creating analytics. You have applications or querying languages which does the real analytics for you. What gets out of it is something that can be visualized and reported using these applications. So to answer your question, both have to go hand in hand. Okay, one is incomplete without the other. If you do not have a reporting or governance or a CCM framework, whatever is getting done will slowly die its own death. So, but then the second part is more easier as compared to the first part. Okay. And then once we have these results, which is about the exceptions getting generated, which is about what are the nature of exceptions. The next step is about learning. How we are learning, how we are taking action, how we are driving decisions, how we are driving action, how we are ensuring that there is some bit of conclusion and say what we call as a CAPA, a corrective and a preventive action taken after this has been done. Because you keep on getting exception and without any action, what is the use of doing this, right? So that's where typically I would say what this is going to be the entire cycle of how or what are the elements that are considered as a part of doing this particular exercise of continuous controls monitoring. The typical element would being, of course, have some technology. Okay, the technology can be designed based on your need. Design your data, the data extraction parameters. Okay, design your data gathering and data housing or staging parameters. understand how you're going to be processing that information, using what are the technologies you will be using for doing the same, how you will be creating concise reports and visualization, how you're going to be telling a story, the root causing, etc. And then finally, what would be the feedback loop which will feed back into this entire system of to ensure that the analytics that we're doing itself evolves over a period of time. So again, I'll stop here, take a small pause, and if there are any questions, reflection on this entire steps that we just talked about, happy to discuss that.
So in the practical scenario,
Yes.
continuous monitoring is of heavily loaded lines,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the audit planning
Mm-hmm.
and the preliminary, audit planning as well as the field work
Mm-hmm.
is basically loaded with this kind of data analytics.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a complete shift, right, from whatever that we're currently doing.
Actually, and that's the need of the hour, sir. Because the speed at which everything is happening in business, we as IA professionals say coming once in a quarter, once in a year, talking about a particular subject, I think it's while we can say that we are giving assurance, but then maybe it's a delayed assurance, right? So that shift is very important, and now as we will discuss it in our subsequent slide as to what can be a future desired state of activities across these three lines, maybe needs to be significantly revamped for for the sake of getting the right kind of assurance, for the sake of getting the right level of assurance for our boards and audit committees. And we will basically discuss it right over here. Okay, we asked a particular question in earlier that from the current state of the three lines, what is expected to be a future state, and who should be owning up the responsibility of CCM? I think practically it comes under the domain of the line 2, which basically owns the entire control framework, who are responsible for all kinds of financial risks, monitoring of financial risks or operational risks. And these are, they are basically going to be responsible for not just, continuous controls monitoring, but generating the right kind of reports. Okay, and these reports then basically will have to, get into the responsibilities of line 1, where line 1 itself will have to go to a completely different cultural shift where they become the primary owners of the risk. So unless the line 1 functions adopt the risk mindset, okay, unless they own that anything going wrong with a particular process or activity in the business is primarily our responsibility, the burden of the entire controls and risk monitoring will always be with the line 2 and line 3 functions. And let's say if line 3 takes care of it, what if we miss? Because we are the last line now, we are the last line of defense. If we as IA professionals miss it, then we don't have any other kind of a defense mechanism. So to kind of shift the entire responsibility of controls monitoring and risk monitoring to line 2, and making the line 1 functions as the primary risk owners, now is the current is, I would say, the future state that we should kind of drive the agenda to, or drive the agenda of CCM2, because that is where they have they get the required ownership mindset. They are, and who can be the best judge of a risk? I as an owner of the function will be the best judge of the risk because I'm doing it day in, day out, right? So I can identify the risks or define the risk in a more comprehensive manner as compared to any a third person who is actually in say a controlling function or an auditing function, right? And then of course if I as the line 1 manager, or say the line 1 functional head has the visibility of what is going wrong, I can correct it. But then again, it has got a mix of doing versus intent. Because many times, the typical challenge is that, line 1 gets so engrossed in their day-to-day activities or, their day-to-day business, that they typically don't tend to focus on this particular, aspect of how I'm managing my risk. So of course it has to be a cultural shift which has to be driven from the top. But then if that is done, then we will, we can have all these pieces in place to ensure that the three lines are actually working as the three lines of defense. Because in the current state, actually the first line is hardly, kind of providing any defense other than creating the policies, other than creating the SOPs and the governance framework, which is just a document. Beyond that, it is, just, kind of a box, which is LOD1, but not really actually performing the role of a defense over there, right? And then, of course, finally, we have line, line 1 owning up the risk and line 2 monitoring that. The third line can actually, start now performing the role of monitoring the activities of the other two lines. Okay, so typically, let's say we give an example. Let's say for all the processes, we have a CCM mechanism in place. Okay, my risk is getting continuously analyzed. My exceptions are getting continuously generated. They're getting addressed on near real time. They're getting actioned near real time. Business is taking its required decisions to mitigate these risks on a near real time. And then, whether the framework that has been put in place, is it working effectively? Okay, are the exceptions being rectified on time or not, or are they getting reported on time or not? Are we taking the actions? Are we driving the, are we assessing the root cause, and are we really preventing, the risk from mitigating? These can be then areas of review from a third line perspective, where they are now actually, and then beyond this, they move or shift from conventional auditing to more focused auditing, where we want to generate some more, some focused areas of review, which are slightly away from the conventional auditing that we do as a part of our exercise. So I think this is exactly, this is typically what I wanted to drive as a, as a comparison of current state, and then using CCM, continuous controls monitoring, how we can drive to a future state. Now, while I've presented this, it is important to focus on these two blue circles, because as we proceed, there will always be a bit of an overlap. There will be an overlap between line 1 and line 2 activities. There will be an overlap between line 2 and line 3 activities. And coordination and collaboration, of course, between these three will be an effective, will be an important area. And this can only be dealt with by designing a very, very effective CCM framework, which ensure that this coordination and collaboration is adequately designed, so that there are, and it's adequately addressed, so that they can kind of create any kind of confusion as we move forward. Yes, sir. Okay, I'll be just now concluding. So I'll now come to the question as to, I think we had, sorry, yeah. Hi, please call me Ashish.
Hi,
No, I can hear you, please. Yeah.
Actually, for taking the data and analyzing the same is a great thing. How the data protection should be ensured during the time of taking the information? Again, it's a standard controls for information security, management systems, and other ISO standards. How we can simply.
So this is a question that has to be dealt with. I think this is your question, right? Data security,
Yeah.
right? But data security is a question not just for CCM as a subject. Data security is a larger question, which is a question for my entire organization. Okay. Now, if I have got protocols and avenues, I have got my data protection tools already in place, they will equally apply to this particular exercise as compared to as they apply to my other data that we use. So the idea is not to take out business data and dump it beyond your firewalls. The data will have to stay within your firewalls. It has to be analyzed within your firewalls. And if you have data protection protocols in place for your general data, they will commonly apply to your CCM data as well. Right? Right. Any other questions? Yeah. Sorry, I am not able to hear you. If you can please provide a mic there.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, now you have completed the theoretical part of the CCM exercise.
Yes.
If any slides are there where practically how it represents these reports and wherever you have implemented some CCM processes to understand in a practical perspective, like how effectively it will be.
Sorry, you're talking about where we have done this?
No. I'm not talking about where you have done. Any practical slides on this CCM, how it operates?
We'll talk about it right away.
Any,
okay. In fact, I just thought that the entire exercise from ensuring the data extraction to this was the practical discussion. But then what we now kind of talk about will basically give you the step-by-step process of transitioning into a future state of CCM through line 2.
Any dashboards or whatever CCM kind of monitoring, any kind of reports?
Maybe we can, because that becomes a bit specific, okay, for a discussion like this. So to be honest, I have not included any dashboards, and particularly for the reason that dashboard is not CCM.
Okay.
No, because that's an area where I, as kind of personally doing this for almost last 7 years, kind of take it that creating dashboards is just monitoring or reporting. CCM is slightly deeper, sir.
Actually, till date, till I have come here, I was also thinking the same thing, that dashboards is part of CCM, because now for audits or any setup, we create dashboards, and a lot of reports generate from that report. And continuously it takes the data from the data warehouse.
Yeah.
So I think
a simple question I'll ask you, sir. Okay, let's say you have created a dashboard to identify, how many instances where your you have not been able to take advantage of opportunity of consolidating your requirement. No? This is a typical analysis that we would want to run for any kind of a procurement exercise. Or I would say, take the same example of duplicate invoices. You want to create a dashboard for the same. The dashboard will give you charts and graphs, okay? But then will it go down to the last transaction, which was actually duplicate? Yes, it will. But will your dashboard actually notify that particular user that this is an exception that has taken place? Okay, please take action. Typically, what you're going to do, you're going to use that dashboard, you're going to create a spreadsheet dump, and then you're going to mail that to the user to take action on that. This is what you're going to do from a typical CCM exercise using a dashboard, right? But is a dashboard meant to be that? If I have to typically dump the data into an Excel, should I be creating a dashboard for that, or should I be having a mechanism where I can actually, create avenues where the exception that gets generated is automated and it gets notified to the user to take action? So this is where that's where I kind of have this reservation of calling creation of dashboard as CCM. It has to be more deeper. It has to be more transactional. Dashboard can be utilized for the purpose of reporting.
Thank you.
Right. Now, there was this question from you, sir, on the third last row. So what are the practical steps, into transitioning into a CCM exercise? Unless we really do a focused exercise of identifying what needs to be monitored, okay, it won't be comprehensive, and that can only be done through some kind of diagnostic reviews. Okay, diagnostic reviews can be, it can be driven by the IIA function. It can also be driven by the line 2 function to identify where lies the risk. Okay, what are the controls that needs to be monitored? So, initially doing that, the inputs to the diagnostic review would be, of course, understanding your overall risk management framework. What are the various key inputs that we get from our stakeholders? And typically these would be HODs in line 1, where they are going to talk about what are the typical risks. And this is something that we do as a part of our IIA function as well. When we design our audit plan, we do these 2 exercises, where we speak, understand our risk management framework. We speak to our customer to understand the inherent risks that we are currently exposed to. Then what is our overall ICFR or IFC framework, and then what is the overall an overall analysis on the data. Now, a diagnostic analysis on the data will basically give me answers around what is the quality of the data. Okay, what is the completeness of the data, the integrity of the data, and using these inputs, we can design what are the key risks to be monitored, what are the control objectives that are required to be monitored, and for those control objectives or risks, what are the possible what could go wrong scenarios. And this is where the success or the failure of the exercise will largely depend how effectively are we able to design the what could go wrong scenarios. Because typically over here you have to think like a person who can either due to inadvertence do something which is not as per the policy, or can do it deliberately. So what are the things that can go wrong? It can be done, it can be people specific, it can be with respect to the effectiveness of the control that we have designed for a particular risk. So designing these what could go wrong scenarios is a factor of experience and knowledge of and the depth of the risk assessment that we have done. And once we have that, once you've identified the key risks to be monitored, the control objectives, and what could go wrong scenarios, then comes the part of automation opportunities. And automation opportunities in these would completely depend upon what we discussed in the beginning as to what are the contributors for performing. Do we have the required data for the same? Okay, do I really want to monitor this risk with respect to the cost that will be required to perform this analysis versus the actual risk that I have? Okay, so these will be typical factors which will define the automation opportunities. And once we have these in place, then comes the decision as to how many of these controls that I want to monitor on a continuous basis can be done as a part of a normal manual testing exercise. Of course, we'd want to minimize it, and how much of this can be performed through data analytics. Taking that decision, we can then again map it back to the structured and unstructured data sources that we have, and then eventually get the final output, which can be in form of monthly dashboards and exceptions, dashboards for the purpose of reporting and exceptions for the purpose of taking action, and continuous feedback to line 1 to have the required root causing, taking the required corrective and preventive actions. So typically, if I am able to answer your question, what would be the practical steps? These would be the practical steps in terms of starting and then executing an exercise of continuous controls monitoring. I take a pause here. If any questions or any comments before I move to what are the possible challenges that we have seen typically in this particular exercise over a period of time, and that would be my concluding slide. So taking another 5 minutes for that. But any questions, any reflections at this point? Yes.
How does the continuous control should function in the sense it should be real time at the time of execution of transaction, post execution of transaction, and then till what period it should be concluded?
So the question over there is that how should the continuous controls monitoring function be designed, and how close should it be to real transaction, right? I think it is again a factor that a question that can be answered as to how what is our risk appetite. Okay, are we comfortable with respect to the fact that if I am able to detect, I'll be able to control, or are we I'll take the same example of duplicate invoices over here to explain it a bit more practically. The decision of how frequent it will be with respect to how frequently I'm making payments. Because I would want to avoid a duplicate payment being made, because once that is done, it is very difficult to get a credit note from a vendor, right? So there cannot be a one single straight answer. There are certain risks that I can monitor on a weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis. Typically the risks that we have with respect to cutoff procedures, I don't want to monitor them on a daily basis. But transactional risks, which are, or say, period and procedures, risk about adequate provisions being taken. And a simple example: have I taken adequate provisions or not? Right? So that, because if I have not done that, my financial number reporting would be incorrect. But that is something that I can very well analyze, say, once in a month. Okay, but then for typical transactions which are of this nature, that has to be analyzed more closer to actual occurrence. So the frequency, which we also discussed in the typical flip show that I was trying to, will define as to what is the frequency and how often do you want to monitor it, and that will depend upon what is the risk and what could go wrong scenarios you are configuring. So it's not that all your scenarios or all your scripts should run on a daily basis or on an hourly basis. It's not necessary that everything should run on a weekly basis. Everything will have to be depending upon the frequency of the control itself.
Sometimes these concurrent audits and all those, they are driven by the regulators' guidelines.
Yes.
And they use the word concurrent. So at that point in time, what does concurrent define?
Again, so concurrency is getting defined based on what is getting monitored and reported. For example, we are talking about various reports simply that goes to regulators on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis, right? So the definition itself is over there. The concurrency is with respect to the reporting frequency itself. Now, the requirement over there could be that while you report to me on a quarterly basis, however, you need to monitor it in-house, say on a daily basis. Then the daily becomes the parameter. So if we are trying to get a single answer as to I should be monitoring it on a daily, weekly, or quarterly basis, I think that is very difficult to achieve, because it will completely depend upon what exactly is getting monitored. Yeah. Exactly. You have to define what how a duplicate payment can get processed. You have to define. Okay, how a duplicate invoice can get processed.
While we work on the tool or solution, we'll have to define these as.
Yes, this is the critical the comprehensiveness of the scenarios over here, and how detailed they are will basically be the critical success factor in terms of achieving the comprehensiveness of your CCM monitoring. Yes.
So, just wondering, so other than the financial risks, in your experience, what are the non-financial risk parameters that you have seen from your experience where you can do like continuous monitoring?
I'll give you a very operational example of CCM, which is with respect to, and I'll again use the word continuous over here, continuous need-based maintenance. Now, the general premise, I'm talking more from a manufacturing perspective over here, but general premise is that in a manufacturing setup, you've got a concept of preventive maintenance. But then using using analytics and using continuous monitoring, you can actually do need-based maintenance. And how it can be done? Based on various kind of sensors that are placed in a manufacturing setup. You can actually monitor these and relate it to any kind of downtime or breakdown to actually preempt or continuously monitor that you really need a maintenance or a downtime for maintenance activity, or it is not required. So that is an example which is at a very deeper level. But then typical operational controls, right? Like whether the quality of the material that you received was of right as per your order or not, as per your requirement or not. Whether I would say the example of whether the what can else be operational. Operational can be whether you are consuming your material on time, whether you're declaring your production on time or not. These are typical controls which are non-financial in nature typically. right? But they can easily be monitored through continuous monitoring. Financial risk is financial risk. Typically, we're talking about the risk that gets contained into our ICOFAR. But then they're only I would say 10% of what can actually get analyzed through CCM. So we have to be more in depth with respect to understanding all our processes, and then once we are into the depth of all our processes, we can design CCM controls around all of these. Sure.
Sorry, I was just going to ask the last question perhaps of the day. Good evening.
Yes, hi, good evening.
So according to the Basel Committee of Banking Risks and the 3 lines of defense model therein, the second line of defense typically looks at things like risk appetite, policy and guidance, framework and oversight. So I'd be interested in understanding your thought process around fitment of CCM in the second line as opposed to an independent stream. When I say independent, different from the actual operations, let's say, as opposed to an independent stream from the first line itself. So why the second line? Because typically you have more SME type people there. The resource number is lesser. And actually having to spend resources to do CCM types of scenarios might be more expensive almost for the organization. So why the second line? Why not the first?
So if we go back to the discussion, I think we are placing the responsibility of owning the exercise on first line itself. If you see this particular depiction over here, we are the identification of risks to be monitored and the continuous improvement program based on line 2 inputs is lying with first line. It has to be first line.
So the actual testing you're saying is in first line?
It has to be first line. Right. So the exceptions which will get generated out of the CCM, they will not be actioned upon by the line 2. Not possible at all. They have to be actioned upon by the line 1 function, and that is where the entire coordination and collaboration is very, very important. Because and that's where I continuously come back to the same topic, that creating dashboards, visualizations will never lead to this. Because over here I'm talking about the the grassroots user level getting involved in this exercise. Because unless we do that, the person who is really executing these transactions on day in day out basis, unless we are able to do that, and unless we are able to tie back that particular personnel with the entire CCM framework, the result that we ultimately want to achieve through this exercise will of course be very, very costly. And I would simply say it simply can be a non-starter. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, this was actually the last. Can we take further questions on a coffee break? Because we have a networking session as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry.
I'm really sorry if I kind of overshot the time on this, but I think thank you for this interactive session. I hope we were able to gather some insights. And of course I'm happy to connect with all of you. As we progress. I'm here till this day, and I'll leave my credentials and my contacts if you want to contact me on this subject any further. Okay, thank you.
Please give a big round of applause to our team from small moment of faith.
Thank you.
So the curiosity of the questions, the number of questions is a testimonial of how interactive the session has been. So sorry for not taking more questions. That's fine. So we exactly meet again here by 4:25 for the next interesting topic on financial crime auditing using digital technology. Yeah. So thank you, everyone.
So welcome to the last session, a very interesting session. So people who have chosen to be in track C, I'm sure you'll not regret, because you're going to be learning a little more about financial crime prevention, right? Okay, so on that note, today we are celebrating the extraordinary women who contribute their talents and dedication to shaping a brighter future. Your resilience, leadership, and unwavering commitment inspires us all. Today, let's honor the achievements and potential of every woman, fostering a workplace where diversity thrives. Empower, uplift, and champion the incredible women around you. So wishing you all a very happy International Women's Day. And on that note, it gives me an immense pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce you a very strong leader and a banking professional who has over 25 years of experience in the field of combating financial crime and conduct risk. She graduated with her MS in Ecology and Environment Science, which is so relevant even in today's context, and further pursued her MBA in Finance and HR. From the London Institute of Banking and Finance, she did her Retail Banking Operations Diploma, and also from International Compliance Association, she got certified in Financial Crime Prevention and Anti-Money Laundering. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not only about our speaker, she's also an accredited interviewer, she's a mentor, and a trained Carnatic dancer and musician. So I'm sure after having heard this, we would still be interested in financial crime and not some music. But on that note, please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Manju Shri Kumar, Director, Head of Assurance, Financial Crime, NatWest Group.
Good evening, and thank you, Ashish, for that uplifting introduction. And as you would know, whatever Ashish says, you must take it with a pinch of salt. So please do not expect any Carnatic dance, right? I don't know what that is. So I'm Manju Shri Kumar, and I take care of financial crime assurance for what is called Financial Crime Services, which is a bit of a misnomer, I know, as far as terms go. However, in today's session, we will talk all about financial crime. What does it mean? What's its life cycle? What are the risks associated with financial crime, especially from a banking perspective, because I come from the banking field. So we will look more at what financial institutions do from a financial crime perspective. However, please feel free to, ask any questions that you may have if you think there are topics which are relevant to your own industries, and I know all of you are either budding or established auditors. So therefore, please feel free to kind of leverage on what you will hear here and see how much of it can actually apply in your own industries and in your own fields. Because although financial crime sounds like something that's very relevant to banking, it is actually something that sits deeply embedded within every single one of our industries. Okay, so without any further ado, we will move into the presentation. So that's the brief agenda for our session. So over the next 30 to 35 minutes, I will try and give you an understanding of the financial crime cycle, what exactly it means, how do we look at it in banking, what does it mean to the criminals out there, who are financial criminals, right? And while understanding the financial crime cycle, we will also look at some of the aspects of it, which is customer due diligence, name screening or customer screening, transaction filtering, also known as payment filtering, and transaction monitoring. We will then discuss a bit about ABC, anti-bribery and corruption, ATE, which is anti-tax evasion, and fraud. And in fraud, as you would know, the current and hot raging topic is cybercrimes, so what that means. And a little bit of a continuation from the speaker of our previous session who talked to us about continuous monitoring and risk-based testing, and how do we actually do that in practice in a bank. And finally, the core topic of this session, which is digital audits. So how have we moved from traditional risk-based continuous monitoring style audits to a complete digital focus? So if the financial criminals out there are a step ahead, how can we then go 2 steps ahead and try and detect and prevent financial crime? Okay, and finally, I hope to have plenty of time towards the end for questions and answers. So anything at all that crosses your mind, please feel free to ask. If I don't have immediate answers, I will also seek answers from this audience, because I'm sure most of you are, complete professionals and can contribute by yourselves from your own respective fields. So also looking forward to having more of an interactive session than just me talking at you. Okay? All right, so let's dive into the agenda then. So this here, what you see, is basically the main tenets of financial crime. And all of us financial crime professionals in the financial institutions work against each of these, work and try to subdue each of these. So starting off right on the top right-hand side, you have anti-money laundering. You've probably heard the term. It is basically not allowing tainted money to enter the banking system, right? And then you have counter-terrorist financing, which is again not using the banking system or the money system or the payment system to aid any terrorist activities anywhere in the world. Followed by economic sanctions and embargoes. The terms can be used almost interchangeably. So what are economic sanctions? So these are basically measures that regulators have posed on certain individuals, certain entities, and even certain sectors and countries to sort of coerce them to stop whatever behavior they are currently doing. So these are ways and means to make them stop doing what they do. Now, how they would do that, we will learn in subsequent slides. Embargoes are another means of restricting certain activities. So the regulator may restrict, example, trade transactions. So there could be trade embargoes, where commercial activities will not happen between jurisdictions or certain countries or certain companies. Or you could have arms embargoes, where there is a complete stoppage on doing anything related to arms and armaments from a particular sector or a particular industry or a particular country. You could also have travel embargoes. So you could say that from this country, we will not allow, example, vessels or ships to come in with trade-related items because of the trade embargoes that have been posed. Okay, and then moving on to fighting tax crime. So we have individuals out there who try to evade taxes, who try to not pay taxes where they are due. This is different from this tax evasion, is different from tax planning, that is actually using the tools and techniques out there to plan your taxes better, and that is legal and legitimate. But tax evasion is not. So what can banks or financial institutions do to fight tax-related crimes? Anti-cybercrime, like I said earlier, the hot topic, right? So because we live in a digital world, and I don't know how many of you have last gone into any of your bank branches, right? Must be ages ago, and only if you had a problem with a card or something. You wouldn't have gone in. So all of us are so used to currently doing everything digitally. And because we do things digitally, the criminals out there also think from that digital perspective. And needless to say, audits also have to happen from the same digital perspective. So remember what I said about being 2 steps ahead of the criminals. So think like how they do and try to think better than what they do. Anti-bribery and corruption. Bribery and corruption is a key financial crime risk. How can you prevent bribes and corruption sitting in a bank? You can look at third parties. You can look at associated parties. You can look at mortgage brokers. You can look at introducers. You can look at your own staff. Are there gifts and entertainment that they are indulging in, which smack of bribes or corruption for any particular event or any particular reason? So what can you do to sort of have that continuous monitoring for ABC related processes? And how can you actually prevent bribery and corruption from tainting your organization? And finally, fraud prevention and detection. Frauds, I think, account currently for the largest in terms of victims of financial crime, right? And you probably know some victims of fraud yourself, or unfortunately, some of you may have been the victims of fraud yourself. So this is not because we've been careless. It's not because we don't know how the system works. It's because, like I said, the criminals out there are always a step smarter. So, 2 steps smarter, right? So all of these various tenets together count for financial crime. So all banking professionals within financial institutions are focused on anti-financial crime. Okay? So we're moving on now to the first tenet of financial crime, which is AML, or anti-money laundering. And as it says on the slide, it is a three-stage process. It encompasses placement, layering, and integration of illicit funds. And if you understand the AML cycle, if you understand what placement, layering, and integration are, then you will be able to identify vulnerabilities and implement effective controls around it. Now, to just try and bring that to life, this is an example, and this is an example straight out of my imagination. It is not what actually happens, but this is to help you understand what a typical money laundering scheme looks like. So let's start from the top left. You can see an individual there. That's probably Ashish. Right? So Ashish has a number of hands giving him money. Ashish, there can be yourself. Ashish, there can be me. All those hands could be the various transactions that we do in our banking accounts. We get money from various places. We pay out money to various places from our accounts, right? Some of us do quite a few of it. Some of us do very few transactions of it. However, the fact is that any one of those hands could actually be black money or tainted money. So typically, what does a laundry do? Converts dirty clothes into clean clothes, black clothes into white clothes. So what is money laundering then? Black money into white money, right? So what is black money? Money which has come from illegal activities, money which has come from criminal purposes, money that has been unlawfully made. And when does it become white money? The moment it enters the banking system, it becomes white money. So what is it that criminals out there want to do? They want to see to it that all this unlawfully gained black money is somehow integrated into the banking system, right? So now going back to the person there, he's most likely what we sometimes call a money mule. A money mule is someone who either unwittingly or maybe in full knowledge allows for some black money to come into his account. It may not be a huge chunk of money, it could just be a few thousands. However, this person does not know what the real source of those funds are. And like I said, those funds could be from any illegal activity. So the money mule is actually allowing money to come into his or her account. That is the first stage. It's called placement. So the money has now actually entered the banking system. Now once it has come, and there you can see it's entered the bank, how does it kind of integrate into the banking system, right? The second step there is called layering. And what happens in layering is the money kind of moves around the banking system through various types of transactions. So you can see out there that that money has then gone to the bank account of a company called X. And remember how typically banks work. They take deposits from the public. They also lend it out to the public. So what comes from one person will go out to another person. And the bank, of course, makes a bit of a margin in between. That's how they make their profits, right? But this money that came from Ashish there is now actually getting into the banking system, and it has gone now into the account of a company called X. From X, it has now gone to an offshore bank. Not even a bank within the country, offshore, outside the country. So the money is now actually left the country. So this has gone through cross-border transactions. This has gone through wire transfers, and the money has now gone into another bank through a correspondent banking scheme. So now you can see how further and further we are distanced from the actual source of the money. By this time, nobody would even realize where that black money came from, right? And from this offshore bank, they make a loan to another company. Why? By this time, the bank which is onshore has absolutely no clue where the money has gone, because it's gone out of the country, it's gone into a different bank, and from that bank it has gone into a different company altogether called Y. Now Y may push the money back to X because Y and X may be colluding, right? So the black money comes back through false invoices to company X, which means company X is your basic source of the entire money laundering and has been responsible for pushing the money in the first place to our Ashish's account. Yeah. Also, how it then gets integrated completely into the system. So this loan, which was given to company Y, it's quite possible that the company either purchases some luxury assets, as you can see, they might invest in construction, they might buy a yacht, they may do financial investments, they may do commercial investments, or they may do industrial investments. So when you look at, example, that building there, when you look at all the bricks and mortar that the building is made of, would you ever guess that there is black money involved there? This is how it completely now integrates into the banking system. So at this point, you have no clue of the origin of the funds. At this point, you have no clue of the origin of the wealth of that customer. So this is the level of difficulty that is presented to banks and financial institutions. And if they have to actually catch this money, if they have to actually spot that the person whose account it went to is up there, then there are a series of controls and a series of measures associated with risk assessment and associated with the level of risk that we are willing to take as a financial institution that needs to be integrated into each and every stage of money laundering. And this is an ongoing challenge for banks every single day. So the operations teams in banks will place controls at each and every point and execute those controls. And it is for the audit teams in the bank to then go and check if the operations teams have actually done their job. Right? So does that give you a sense of how money laundering works, and would you have any specific questions? Well, if there's nothing that pops up in your mind now, but if something comes as we are going through it, park it there, and then let's address it towards the end. Okay?
There's no Ashish here. That's why there are no questions.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Ashish in your exam.
So everyone believes in Ashish's honesty there. Okay? Right. Sorry, I can't hear you too well. Is there a mic that can be passed, please? By way of a loan. Yes, by way of a loan from this offshore bank to company Y, and then the bank uses it to invest in various luxury assets, and then the money thus gets completely hidden and concealed into the system, and we are not able to trace its origins.
What is the benefit that the person will perform the illegal activity and putting the money into that activity?
So if they are a money mule, then they are actually enticed by the criminals. And you will find that this is especially true in the case of young people, students. You know, they are just told, allow us to put, let's say, 10,000 into your account. We'll give you 1,000 for a party tonight. So a student will unknowingly accept that money just for the quick bucks that come along with it. So that's what happens for someone who is knowingly doing it. But that activity in itself is illegal. You cannot allow for your account to be used just with the promise of that extra 1,000 that's being given to you. At the same time, there could be people who are completely unaware. You know, so I may have a contract, I may have a tenant, you know, so the tenant gives me money every month, right? I do not know where that money is coming from. I'm just taking that check because it is my tenant's rent money. So it could be either knowingly or unknowingly. However, we will be asked questions by our bankers in terms of what the source of all this money is, and we should be able to prove with correct documentation that whatever we have put into our accounts is legit, whatever we put into our accounts, we are aware of what the source is. And that's perhaps the only plea we have against things like money laundering regulations.
So how the controls will be different for a bank versus this offshore bank which is actually receiving the funds from another bank?
So the controls could be the same or different because each bank goes with its own framework.
Because in this scenario, this person who has received the money,
Mm-hmm.
so that's the starting point. But when it comes to X, it is almost legitimate because
It's almost gone into so many layers,
yeah.
yes. So this is, like I said, this is just the first stage. We will now see how each of these points, the controls are embedded in banks. Okay, so like I mentioned at the beginning, we have things like filtering and screening and customer due diligence. So all of those will come into play for each and every payment that goes through a bank.
suggest if you have questions, please first raise your hand so that the person knows where the mic has to come. It will save time. Plus, if you want, we can have all questions at the end of the session because it's just a first slide. I'm conscious of that as well. Is that okay with all?
But you can complete your question, no problem.
Yeah, maybe
Since you have the mic now. Oh. So here's a mic that's working. Not too well.
Just extending my question. So if it's for a rent or small amount, that's something different. If the person making the illegal business and he is making huge money and he is routing to this mule, so what is the benefit that illegal person is going to get out of this money? Because he is just parking the money to
So
something.
the simple answer is for the illegal person or the criminal, their black money is becoming white. Somehow or the other, they have managed to put that into the banking system, right? Whether it is through a mule or whether it is through some other unsuspecting people who have banking accounts. The criminals out there are always trying to convert the black money to white. That's the underlying message in the entire anti-money laundering circle. Okay, and again, this is a very simplistic version, more for purposes of explanation. It is not as simple as this. Somebody just doesn't come and give you $1,000 and say, take it, right? There is a very complex web and series of transactions. When we sit in our banking counters and look at the interplay between various accounts, it's mind-boggling.
So they will take other route. That's what you are saying.
They could take plenty of routes as far as the money gets in, which is all they want. All right, so again, conscious of time, so we will just move on. And I think, again, in the interest of time, please park your questions towards the end. We'll take them all up at one shot. And maybe when I come towards the end of the presentation, you will perhaps get a better understanding of the various stages of the cycle. And then, therefore, some of your questions might just be answered as we speak. Okay? All right. Customer due diligence. And all of us who've opened banking accounts are aware of the number of documents that are taken by banks when the accounts are opened, right? Here is the first point of identifying and knowing the customer. You would have heard the term KYC, know your customer. For banks, KYC is of paramount importance. For individuals, for retail banking customers, we would need to identify the customer. We would need to verify the customer. We would need to understand the source of their transactions. We would need to understand the origin of the funds that go into their accounts. We would need to understand what kinds of transactions they would make and with who. To a lesser extent, what makes more sense from a due diligence perspective is to look at commercial entities, companies, which have tons and tons of transactions in their accounts every single day. It could be through cash, it could be through cross-border transfers, it could be through pay orders, drafts, remittances, all the tools that you can think of that the banking framework supports. Trade, so many things. And all of them have an interplay. So therefore, you need to know who that company is. The same processes of identifying and verifying that you do for a retail customer is also done for a corporate customer, for the beneficial owners of that company, for the significant controllers of that company to a particular percentage. And if it is a complex company that has a big corporate network behind it, owned in part by one company, and then that owned in part by another individual, and then this individual also has a controlling share in another company, then we would need to identify and verify each of the key individuals in each of these companies, all the way up to the ultimate beneficial owner, or UBO, as they are called, right? So customer due diligence at the point of onboarding is a key item that most regulators literally breathe down the necks of banks. So whenever the regulators come into the banking institutions for their supervision, for their inspection, they almost always look to see customer files, the documentation that goes behind it, and the level of due diligence that the banks have done. Which is why, even to the point of irritation, we have to supply our banks with all the documents that they come asking for every year when they talk about KYC. Right? You will all have a bit of a flashback now in terms of how much are they asking. This is the reason they are asking. They are under regulatory scrutiny. Customer onboarding and the procedures which sit behind it are the first point of identifying and verifying that the individual that is coming into the system is legit and who they claim they are. Okay? We also have CDD, and here is the process of verifying the identity and assessing the risk associated with customers. Each customer is given a risk classification in the bank. There could be high-risk customers, either because they are dealing in a particular sector which is high risk, let's say casinos, betting, gambling, nail bars, salon bars, things like that, or because of the jurisdiction that they are based in. They could be in sanctioned countries, in which case we wouldn't open the accounts at all. And also because of the kinds of business that they do, right? So if they are a customer that says, we deal with textiles, okay, we would ask them upfront, what is the kind of inflow and outflow that we can expect to see in your account? And who are the people that you would normally associate with? And out of the blue, in the middle of a month, if you see this particular textile company giving out checks or receiving payments from a construction company, that should be antennae up. What is the connection? So we need to ask those questions. So therefore, we have relationship managers as well, as you're aware, associated with some of the high-risk accounts or with some of those accounts which have greater proportions of wealth in it. And these relationship managers will be in a constant state of interaction with the customers. And if we see these transactions, like I said, textile to construction, we would seek the answers for it. If it is a payment that we can stop, and if we are not satisfied with the replies that we get, we can actually reverse that payment or not do the transaction at all. Okay? All of these things come within the process of CDD. So needless to say, the high-risk customers, those who are classed as high-risk, need to be looked at, need to be conducted from a due diligence perspective at a much greater frequency than a medium-risk or a low-risk customer. Okay, so the client due diligence cycle follows that. So for a high-risk customer, for example, there would be a review done every single year on everything and anything to do with their account. So what are the types of transactions that happened over the last 1 year? Is it in accordance with what they told us in the beginning? Have their cash deposits gone up? Has their overall customer journey mapping been different? Are we able to see certain vulnerabilities in the customer journey where we can advise the customer? Can we tell them where to put their investments in? There are various points that you can actually look at from a customer due diligence perspective. And this happens in every bank, basis the risk appetite that the bank has, basis the risk assessment that the bank has done of its customers. All of these processes happen not just at the time of onboarding, but throughout the life cycle of the customer. When you look at a customer journey, there could be various events in it. The customer could have landed a new job. The customer could have shifted from one location to another. The customer could have had a marriage. The customer could have had a child. The customer could have taken a mortgage and taken a loan and acquired some property. So each of these are touch points in the customer's journey, which as bankers we need to keenly be on the lookout for and see that every single thing that they are doing is in line with the regulatory guidelines and is compliant. Okay, so that's the CDD life cycle at the point of onboarding and at every stage that the customer goes through. Right, client screening, and this will probably answer some of your questions. What is client screening? So we just spoke about sanctions, right? We just spoke that certain regulators actually have a whole list of individuals and entities and sectors and even countries that they have sanctioned. And when you say they have sanctioned, it means any transactions with these individuals, entities, etc. is prohibited. So as financial institutions, we must take care to see that our customers do not deal with any of these sanctioned individuals, entities, transactions, countries, etc. What is worse, we must ensure that we have not opened accounts of such individuals or entities. So on a daily basis, there is a screening that happens of our entire customer database with the sanctions lists provided by the banks. provided by the regulators. And this could be any regulator globally. It could be our local regulator, it could be a Reserve Bank of India list, it could be regulators like the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, it could be the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation, it could be the Office of Foreign Assets Controls in the US, it could be any of those global regulators that publish lists of sanctioned individuals and entities. So each and every bank, local or global, needs to collate this list from each of the regulatory websites and maintain it internally in a screening system. So when you have, and I'm just throwing a number here, you have, let's say, 10 lakh customers in your database. Every single day, each one of these 10 lakh customers is screened against the sanctions lists. Right? So if you have Manju Shri Kumar as a customer in a bank, and you have Manju Kumar as a sanctioned individual, when that screening happens, although it is not an exact name match, it is still a close name match. So there is fuzzy logic incorporated into these systems, and therefore the systems would throw out an alert to the banking operations teams saying, here is a match we found against one of your customers. Now this banking official has to actually sit and investigate that both these individuals are not the same. Okay, now how would they do that? They could do that through a variety of factors. Look for basic name mismatch. Look for differences in date of birth. Look for differences in nationality. Look for differences in country of residence. Look for the type of business that the customer does versus whatever the watch person, we call them watch people, the names in the sanctions list. Watch person and their level of business versus our customer's level of business. This screening happens every single day. Okay, and it normally runs as an overnight batch processing kind of a thing. And it throws out tons of alerts the next day to operations analysts who then sit and investigate these alerts. Sometimes you get a true hit. Sometimes you get a customer who is actually that person on the list, and that means immediate reporting to the regulator. And then there is a series of processes that works all the way through till the exit, potentially, of that customer from the bank. Okay, so by doing name screening, both against the sanctions list as well as what we call PEPs, politically exposed person. So as you can imagine, a politically exposed person has that much more of a risk in terms of exposure to illegal activities, in terms of exposure to elements of bribery and corruption, and sometimes in terms of terrorist financing as well. So therefore, PEP databases are kept very separate. All PEPs are classified as high risk automatically. We do not permit PEPs to have accounts or not do transactions with PEPs, but we do look at PEP transactions and PEP accounts with a huge magnifying lens. Every single thing that they do is subject to the utmost scrutiny. PEPs are normally onboarded only after approvals from the senior most levels of management of the bank. Okay, so this is one way in which you can see that you're not doing business with high-risk individuals or entities that are involved in fin crimes. Now, what about the audit of these things? So I can tell you for a fact that when fuzzy logic is put into a screening system, for every individual in the bank, it can potentially throw out about 10 to 15 alerts every day for every individual. And we are talking 10 lakh customers in my imaginary bank. In an actual global bank, it's much, much more. So the amount of resource that goes in banks to actually do these alert investigations is considerable. But do auditors have that kind of resource? So for auditors to do testing and monitoring of this kind of a transaction that the operations people do, this is where you should use digital tools. Because here is a prime opportunity to automate. So let's say we deploy some machine learning here. Okay, so a machine can actually be trained to do this evaluation of Manju Shri Kumar versus Manju Kumar. The machine can be trained, or if you use RPA, robotic process automation, if you show the robot what the actual analyst is doing on the ground, the robot can be trained to kind of compare these two fields. So certain elements which are available on the screen of the analyst, the robot can do its testing as well. When you do that, A, you will save a lot of resource. Your resources, the audit resource, can actually be used for more high risk and complex and material transactions. And B, you will have increased coverage of the number of transactions that you can actually audit when you use these automated tools. Or you can use artificial intelligence. You can do these neural models. I'm sure you've heard of these neural models. So pretty much like the neurons in our own bodies, right? So we've got neurons or nerve cells, and we've got chemical reactions between them by way of synapses. And one influences the action of the other, and the other influences the action of the next. Similarly, you can have an artificial neural model where it is programmed to look at data parameterization, collect one bit of data, move that seamlessly into the next bit of investigation, move that into the next bit of investigation. So you train your machines to do these kinds of screening audits. The machines will only refer to you those things which it does not understand, which is exceptions based, which is not run of the mill. And these exceptions are what should be referred to a human. We should not be using our limited resource to actually do tons and tons and tons of testing. And anyways, these are all old traditional methods now, right? We don't believe in excessive sampling. We believe in risk-based sampling, right? So that was client screening. So just like you do for clients, you do for the client's transactions. All the payments that they do, all the inflows and outflows into their accounts are similarly subject to an automated screening. This screening will be done of all the elements in the payment. So for example, if you're looking at a cross-border transaction, if let's say you're a global bank, there's one customer sitting in Greece and another customer sitting in the UK. The customer in Greece is making a payment to the customer in the UK. This is done through a SWIFT message. You must have heard of SWIFT. Yeah? So it's the cross-border way of transmitting money. These SWIFT messages come into the banks. You are supposed to look very carefully at each and every field in that SWIFT message to understand who's making the payment, where is it originating from, where is it going, what is the purpose of the payment, is it a high value transaction or is it a low value and therefore you do not need to expend your resources into it. Doing all of this manually will take a lot of time. Applying an automated screening of these transactions will do the same thing that the name screening did, which is that it will run it automatically against all the sanctioned lists, the PEP databases, and anything that comes in that payment anywhere, even remotely associated with sanctioned entities or individuals, will be thrown out as alerts to the operations people in the banks who will follow a similar nature of investigation. If it is simple enough, like I explained before, if it is something that you can straight away discount using factors, it's easy enough to complete. In many cases, though, it is not like that. Most of the factors would really match. Or you perhaps do not know more about either the watch person or the customer. So therefore, they conduct a series of adverse press checks. They go out and look at media sources to see if any of these individuals has featured in any press or news articles in the past. It is not definitive, but it gives you a steer. It helps you understand that this person has been in the news for the wrong reasons. So can we link that back then to our customer? Anything that connects. Like I said earlier, textile to construction. What is the connection? Why is this payment happening? Should we let this payment go? So unless you've got all the elements of the investigation in hand, you cannot release a payment that has come through in the transaction filtering investigation. Same thing as I said in terms of digital audits for transaction filtering. You can use artificial intelligence, you can use robotic process automation, you can use statistical data modeling. You can actually quantify these things. You can give it certain subsets and say that throw out all the things that fall into these subsets. You can either have supervised robotic pieces or unsupervised robotic pieces. So when I say supervised, it means we have set the parameters The robot just compares. When it is unsupervised, we have not set any parameters. The robot actually gets in and does a complete collateralization of that raw data. Both ways, you will get results. And you can focus on those results to see if the people in operations have done that alert investigation correctly or not. And obviously, if they have not, then that would be the audit finding. Right? Transaction filtering is real time, what we saw before. It is as the payment happens. There is something else called transaction monitoring. This is post facto surveillance. After a series of payments have gone through, the transaction monitoring system may actually detect certain things in that customer's profile, which they may not find in line with the customer due diligence information that we have in the bank as a record. May not be able to see this through filtering, but can be detected through monitoring, because monitoring is post facto and monitoring goes through a complete series of transactions in the customer's account. Could be local, could be cross-border or international, could be trade related, but anything that touches that account, the monitoring system will have a full walkthrough and then throw out an alert saying, there is something wrong with this account. Have a look. This then comes to the operations analyst. Monitoring cases, as you can imagine, are much more in terms of the actual time required to sort of discount the alert that has been generated. Because in monitoring, you really have to do a deep dive into the customer's entire profile and try every possible external data source to match up that profile. So you could go into data sources like the company's house, right? The registrar of companies. You could see what it says there about this particular business or entity. So monitoring also has a number of activities, and as a bank, if we are suspicious about anything that a customer is doing, then we are duty bound to raise a suspicious activity report or an IMLSR, internal money laundering suspicion report. This is a requirement that the regulator expects. If the regulator comes in and does their inspection and supervision, and if they find certain accounts like this, which they deem suspicious, the first question that will be asked to the bank is, why have you not filed a suspicious activity report? You need not prove anything for a suspicious account report. If you simply have the suspicion, that's enough. But you will have to raise it. And law enforcement agencies will pick it up, and crime agencies will pick it up. And we will then follow their sort of advice in terms of the transactions on the account. Sometimes we may block the account. We may not consent to release any funds that the customer asks for these legal and regulatory reasons, and sometimes even exit the account. It all depends on the investigation of the law enforcement piece. Okay, so that's transaction monitoring. ABC, which we talked about in the past. So whatever you would do for a customer, you can equally do for a third party that is associated with the bank. You could have suppliers, you could have non-suppliers, you could have a number of brokers, introducers, etc., who do work for you. If their accounts are being opened in your bank and the payments are going through that account, then you would need to follow the entire series of client due diligence. Only it would be called third-party due diligence, to check for any bribery or corruption measures. And let me just give you a simple example. So let's say the bank wants an agency for doing housekeeping, okay, of the bank's premises, of the branch. They would come out with a tender. There would be various parties that would apply for it. If there is any coercion, bribe, or corruption between one of those housekeeping agencies and, let's say, an internal employee of the bank, these are the measures that will catch that. We also look at any gifts or entertainment that is either provided to bank officials or given out by bank officials to customers or third parties. There's a regular scrutiny around that. We take a look at all the referral employee opportunities inside the bank. So if I am referring somebody I know to an open position in the bank, then there is a whole series of due diligence done on me and on that person, and if that person has had any contact with the bank in the past, right? Similarly, if we are doing sponsorships, those could be commercial sponsorships or could be charitable sponsorships. We could also do, certain activities as a bank to sponsor various events. So for each of these, the bribery and corruption angle is completely scrutinized through a series of measures. Now, the main thing to remember is anything that is laid down as a process, a financial crime process, can be audited. It is only the ad hoc activities that you're perhaps not able to touch. But if you have a regular business as usual piece, then it can be subject to audits, and what can be subject to audits can equally be subject to digital audits. Digital audits probably make it much easier for auditors. Okay, so that's the series of anti-bribery and corruption measures. And finally, tax evasion. So as we are doing due diligence, there are a series of questions that are asked to the customer in terms of their taxes. Where do they pay their taxes? What is the country of tax residency? What is the country of nationality? And if there are any indicia or triggers, like if they have changed their country and if they're trying to evade taxes as a result, this process will actually catch hold of that. So customer taxation through various life events of the customer can be looked at to see if the customer is evading taxes. Again, not to be confused with tax planning or tax avoidance, both are legit. This is illegitimate and cannot be done. So we have tax evasion measures as well within the bank to see that the reporting that we do ultimately to the tax authorities is accurate and that they are not assigned some kind of a recalcitrant status. That's anti-tax evasion. And finally, fraud detection. Don't need to tell you about fraud, right? It's all over the place. Credit card fraud, phishing, wishing, smishing, so many social engineering techniques out there by which criminals try to get you to part with your personal details and therefore do an identity theft, get you to part with your bank details and try to siphon funds off, or get you to action certain things as employees within a bank by sending emails from the CEO, etc. All these things have happened, right? So there are so many ways and means in which the criminals try to get to your money. And therefore, we have a number of fraud detection techniques as well in the bank, which again are both auditable using digital audits. Financial crime audits, I think I've sort of touched upon how this can be done in each of those stages of the financial crime life cycle. Can definitely be done wherever there is a straight through process, it can be easily done. However, how much can we cover? Right? So if we go out there and let's say pick up 100 transactions in a day, it might be that 101st transaction which we have not looked at, which is actually the one that is either a money laundering one or a bribery and corruption related one or a tax evasion one. So how do we get to the right samples so that we may really provide that assurance to the businesses, to our senior management and to stakeholders? Traditionally, banks do risk-based testing. What do we mean by risk-based testing? Can anybody volunteer an answer?
Basically, you identify where are there are risks, so you prioritize those activities, then you audit against that, test them.
Yeah.
Wherever you see there's no risk in it or the risk is less, probably your priority or your frequency would be less.
Yeah. And how would you identify where the risk is more?
Based on your experience and your skills to identify like where all the fraud can happen, where all the money can be misused, where all the excess black money can be converted to like white money.
Yeah, but it's not apparent though, is it? You can't really see it, can you? So, not putting you on the spot, but let me just tell you. So, what happens, let's take any one example here, right? Let's take transaction filtering, which is screening of payments. When we say risk-based approach for transaction filtering, what do we mean?
So you think the value or the one which you said like construction companies giving money to a person who is an employee. So you filter all those transactions. Some of them can be genuine, but your filtering would throw you like lakhs of times. From there you then identify which is actually a case.
Exactly. So which means, in other words, you will try and focus on the higher risk customers or higher risk sectors or higher risk businesses. So a normal retail employee who is getting only salary as their source of income every month, you wouldn't want to focus your audit resource on that. You would rather focus it on a politically exposed person. As an auditor, you would rather look at what the politically exposed person's filtering alerts are. So which means, traditionally, as auditors, we've always tried and taken a larger sample of higher risk customers and a smaller sample of medium risk customers and an almost insignificant sample of lower risk customers. So it is proportionate to the risk. We're not saying that we ignore the lower risk altogether. We still do a small sample just to check if everything is fine, but our focus is more on the higher risk customers, right? So would you agree that's a sensible approach? Yes? So this risk-based testing approach is manual. As he said, you literally have to screen and filter through tons of transactions to see, are this high risk? Okay, let's do it. Is this medium risk? Don't do it. This is low risk. Do we have the time and energy for this? That's the last thing we have, right? So what we actually need to do then is to, again, apply those automated solutions. Because those automated solutions will, by themselves, do the parameterization for you. They will automatically take out those transactions which are associated with high-risk individuals or entities. They will automatically take out those samples which have been referred. When I say referred, I mean the first level of operations analyst has not been able to take a decision on the alert. Therefore, they have referred it to the second level, where there is more extensive search, where there are external sources that are looked at, right, where there are regulatory websites that are scanned. And even if those level 2 analysts have not been able to take a decision, it would finally go to the second line of defense, to maybe the group that owns sanctions for the bank. And they will not just use all their sanctions subject matter expertise, but they will also be in touch with other banks, perhaps the very bank from which this transaction is coming or going to understand a bit more about the other leg of the transaction. They may even get in touch with the regulators if they suspect this particular transaction's one element or customer to have had some suspicious activity in the past. So if you see that these alerts have been referred from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, you should be focusing more on that. Because that means there are additional complexities. There are more nuances in the transaction that you need to delve into. So that kind of a risk-based testing, which hitherto has been done on a completely manual basis, is now being done using all these automated tools. Continuous monitoring. Why continuous monitoring? These are financial transactions. If we don't look at them, somebody somewhere will lose money. Somebody somewhere will taint the bank. The bank will have to answer the regulator. The economy of the country will suffer. The country itself may get sanctioned. A recent example of sanctions is the Ukraine war, when Russia did an invasion, and there were tons and tons of sanctions that were posed by most global regulatory bodies on Russia. So right now, if any transaction comes through the bank that has Russia somewhere in it, we stop it right there because it is sanctioned. And unless it is fully investigated, and unless it is found to be of something that is of real legitimate reason, for example, it's some humanitarian aid, medicines or supplies going through the Red Cross, something like that, then that we would permit with the consent of the regulator. We would take it all the way there, and only if the regulator says okay, would we go ahead and permit such transactions. So for these kinds of transactions, continuous monitoring is required. It is done on a daily basis. It is done on some of the most material financial crime processes in all financial institutions. So a selection of client onboarding continuous monitoring happens every day. A selection of transaction filtering, a selection of payment screening and name screening, a selection of ABC or ATE related transactions go through continuous monitoring in every bank. Continuous monitoring is literally a way for us to actually see on an ongoing real-time basis what is happening. It is literally the operating rhythm of the banking institution. Okay, so these were the risk-based testing and the continuous monitoring were till now the ways in which these things were looked after. But in today's technology-filled world where the criminals are not happy with just general ledger-based, paper-based transactions. The focus is all on digital. Right? So the bad guys are always thinking 2 steps ahead. So now we are literally going 3 steps ahead. How do we do this? We have technically trained, knowledgeable subject matter experts in the bank who are able to come out with technology-based solutions that can help auditors to find out and go to the literal root cause of the problem. We use artificial intelligence. If we have, let's say, trade transactions, and some of you may have seen trade transactions have documents that are this big, so much of content. How much time is it going to take you to read through this and to literally separate the grain from the chaff? If you give it a natural language processing tool, that natural language processing tool can be taught to actually go through that entire documents and give you insights that go straight to what that document is telling you. Saves a lot of time. Operations people are doing it themselves. As digital auditors, we can also do the same. In fact, we can re-perform some of the digital audits, some of the digital processes that have been done by operations and see if they are in line with what is required. We also have systems assurance, auditors that actually do audits on the systems, on these artificial intelligence and other such tools. They could be end user developed applications. We have tools that check tools. And then we have humans that check tools. They look at the rules that underlie each of these systems. They look at what has been written down as the base or ground lines with each of these digital tools. And then they evaluate that on an ongoing basis to see if it is fit for purpose or not. And where it is not, immediate course correction is required. So this is where our stakeholders, our senior management look at us for support, because they want us to tell them not just that the people in the bank are doing okay, they also want us to tell them that these various systems and digital topics in the bank are equally doing okay. So audit now has all levels of expertise in it. It's not just about operations, productivity, metrics, controls, and adherence. It's not just about policies, processes, guidelines. It is also about systems, rules, filters. Right? So the more we technically equip ourselves in these future skills, the better it is for us as digital auditors, because this is tomorrow. We've moved away from traditional methods. Therefore, we should move away from our traditional thinking as well. Think ahead, go out there and look at the market, see what tools and techniques are available. Look at the kinds of recruitment that you do when you build up your audit teams, and try and get as much of digital tools and techniques in your kitty as possible, because this is the way of the future. Okay, that's probably all I had for today. Ashish has just said 5 minutes. Is that for questions or was that just for me?
No, I mean, yeah, perfect timing, so we can now take all your questions. Please.
All right.
Go for it.
Okay, yes sir. Please hand over the mic.
Maybe we can keep one on this side.
Yeah, good evening, madam.
Good evening.
All this, whatever the controls measures, whatever you said, is it applicable for all the banks across the country? Is a private, nationalized, whatever, a small bank, is it applicable for all? And is it RBI given rules, or is it each and every bank has got their own set of control measures?
Sir, I've worked in banks that span about 30 to 40 countries. So which also means I have interacted with close to 30 to 40 regulators. And I can honestly tell you that not all regulators are the same. Some regulators are very stringent, very forward thinking. You know, they even have things like regulatory sandboxes, which means they give companies and banks like us a safe space to come and test new technologies under their supervision. So they are so forward looking and have so much of foresight. But then there are some companies where the measures have still not come up to the global standards of anti-financial crime. So, you know, you've probably heard of the standard setting body FATF. Financial Action Task Force. You've probably heard of that. So the FATF actually, as a comparative meter, assigns lists to each country. Some of the countries are on the topmost, and I think that's a direct reflection of their regulatory environment because their regulators have such close supervision and understand the intricacies of banking so well and have such tight control over especially the top 4 banks from a financial risk perspective or a capital adequacy perspective. They have such tight controls that the banks perform brilliantly. We don't want a repeat of what happened in 2008. Right? We don't want the financial crisis to bring everything down, crashing. So therefore, those regulators have taken these things into their hands and hold the banks so closely. They do scenario testing exercise. They put stress tests on the bank and see how they perform. And then there are some regulators who haven't really come up there, like I said, to the mark. These regulators and the countries that they govern are in the FATF's grey list. And it has always been the FATF's endeavor to see that these countries slowly but surely, with constant cooperation from the regulators, move into that, let's say, emerged list. So the rules apply for everybody. These situations exist in every country. But unfortunately for us, not all regulators have the same levels of control.
You spoke about the embargo and trade sanctions. And with regard to embargo, how you update yourself from the concerned regulators, or also you also advise your customers? Suppose if the customer is dealing with an embargo country, in that case you will in front tell the customer no, not to trade, or once the transaction is over you will stop it. So which level it will happen?
So the first part of your question, so we are constantly in a state of touch with the regulator. We are always scanning their websites. We are looking at all the latest trends. We attend all these industry level and regulatory level conferences and meetings where we are also appraised of what is coming new into the market. And then of course there are sessions like this where exchange of best practices is there. We can all talk amongst ourselves, see what works, what doesn't. In terms of advising the customer, if the customer approaches us beforehand and says that this is what they want to do, we will understand the transaction, we will advise them accordingly. If the customer does not tell us and straight away does the payment, we will cash the payment during our filtering and even prohibit it.
Thank you.
Hello. Can you please go to the slide 3, if you don't mind?
Sure. What slide was it?
This is the placement, the money laundering slide. So I believe the most riskiest aspect in that slide is the placement part, wherein initially the black is getting into white. So will any filtering, means if it is filtered at the first place, whatever is the offshore bank getting it, it is legit money only, right? From a normal bank to his bank.
Yes, if it is not caught, it will just get integrated.
So in this entire slide, we are seeing placement as the biggest risk. Second is the false invoice company. I mean, possible false invoice raised by company X to Y. That is the risk that we
in my simplified example, yes.
Yes, okay. And again, another curious question is, how does this black money originate? Basically, money does not come by itself as black.
Yeah.
So it has been given by a
It originates from criminal activities.
No, even to criminals, how does it come? Like, it's a chicken egg kind of a thing only, right?
So a criminal activity, can I give you an example? Illegal wildlife trade.
Yeah, for that.
Doesn't come by itself. They are actually taking an illegal animal, like a pangolin, for example, from one country to the other, and they are earning money out of it.
Yeah, so that
That's
money
a criminal activity.
What money is there, it is from a bank only, right? Means whatever money is becoming black is from a white source, it is becoming a black money, and that black money is again converted into a white source.
Ashish is very eager to answer this.
Drug trafficking. No one gives you check to buy drugs, right?
Yeah.
Or child trafficking, human trafficking, illegal arms.
Yeah, everything is cash based, but that cash is given by a bank to anybody.
But then,
no,
So,
money is printed
Can
by government.
Can I, just 1 second. So if you have gone to your bank account and taken the money, it's come from a bank.
Yeah.
If you are then going to go and use that for human trafficking, that money is illegal straight away, even though it came from the bank. You have used it for a criminal activity. From that point onwards, whatever has happened in terms of that illegal exploitation of people, that human trafficking, it is up to a bank to actually stop you from putting the proceeds of that money, because you've spent some money in procuring that unfortunate human. Why are you doing that? Because you're expecting much, much more money to come to you when you make a sale of that unfortunate human. That extra money that you will try and put back in the bank, that is where it should be got. So all money comes from someone's account, agreed. All money is printed by Reserve Bank of India, etc., agreed. However, the usage of it. So that is why in that customer due diligence, what was important was source of wealth, source of funds. The origin of the fund, if it is clean, there is no problem. If the origin of the fund is dirty, it is criminal and it is illegal, then it becomes a money laundering scheme.
Any other last questions? Yeah, please.
Good evening. You were discussing about a lot of anti-money laundering, anti-fraud measures. So in spite of all these, why this Punjab National Bank and ILNFS fraud arises, in spite of all these measures, from transaction filtering, continuous monitoring and all that, in spite of the bigger fraud like Punjab National Bank, how does it happen?
Very good question, sir. And I think some part of that answer I've probably given when he was asking, which is that these are global level controls.
Yeah.
Not everybody implements these global level controls in the true spirit. Sometimes you have people that don't work. Sometimes you have systems that don't work. Sometimes you have a whole culture that doesn't work. A combination of any of these things, and add to that certain factors like the country that this is and the amount of regulatory scrutiny that that country's banks are facing, all of these factors together contribute to the various banking frauds, the various licenses being lost, reputational risk issues, fines being imposed by the regulators. So each and every time the regulators find that things are not happening as they should be, they will impose a fine on the bank. In fact, if the bank cooperates, there is a 30% reduction in that fine as well. But when you take that fine, that's a huge slap on the face, isn't it? So then you will go back and implement all those measures which you had not so far. Not only that, you will have to demonstrate to the regulator and to independent bodies like FATF that those global levels of countermeasures are now in place. So when the regulator even provides you a safe space to try and experiment and simplify a bit, to try and build systems using all these digital tools, why not make use of it? Why not involve them right at the beginning? Take their cooperation, understand from them if this is fine, whatever we are doing, is it fine? No regulator is going to say, I will not tell you now. I will only come for an inspection and then fine you. Every regulator is open to cooperation.
Let's take that as the last question. Maybe after the session, if you don't mind just
You were speaking about PEP accounts.
Okay.
Okay. Does the PEP is defined across globe in the same way?
Yes.
And it is, the databases are interchanged between countries. That is what I want to understand.
Yeah, so in some countries, the definitions of a PEP are different. So for example, in UK, the mayor of the city is a PEP. What would be our India equivalent? I'm not too sure if they will be classified as politically exposed persons. Maybe they are. Maybe they are. So some positions are uniformly and globally, presidents, prime ministers, members of the ruling party, etc., are all, without exception PEPs. But in some countries, there are also a few local definitions which need to be looked at.
Databases get exchanged or it is published somewhere?
PEP lists are also available, similarly like this, but normally banks also maintain their own PEP lists basis the jurisdiction they are in, because they would have certain names associated with that. So they would want to keep a database of the actual names as well. Rather than just saying this position, they would have the name of the person in that position, which will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
without naming any company here, but still, like WorldCheck is a good example of a database where you have different packages of PEP lists which you can cut. WorldCheck.
There is a company called WorldCheck, which actually, it's a third-party company that supplies sanctions lists and PEP lists to bank. So the banks can either choose to themselves go on to various regulatory websites and help themselves to the daily names of sanctioned individuals or lists, or they can contract to a third party like WorldCheck, which will do that job for you and supply you with the lists on a daily basis. Again, all up to the appetite of the bank.
Okay, on that note then, thank you so much, Manju.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being a lovely audience. And if you have any questions at all, send them to Ashish.
Yes, sir, it will be a pleasure.
And he'll pass them on to me.
Thank you so much, Manju, for giving us your time and your expertise. We'll see you all tomorrow, day 2 of the conference.
Thank you.